Welcome back to the Creation Reformation YouTube channel. This is the first video on the channel in the year 2026. And I thought the best way to open up the new year is with a presentation that I've given at middle school chapels before. Not that this is like a simpler, less scientific presentation or middle school friendly presentation, but really it's because it's really talking about the goals that I've kind of set forward as I've been involved in the creation movement. If you're new to the channel, and I know there's been a handful of people who have subscribed, I think in the more recent days because of some shout outs I've gotten from the Is Genesis History YouTube channel. So if you're a subscriber to Is Genesis History and you've found me through there, welcome. Thanks for joining me. This is a channel that I've started to build up with a kind of the movement that I'm calling Creation Reformation. We have a website over at creationreformationnewengland.com. And so this video is really going to talk a lot about what I'm trying to do with Creation Reformation and some of the things that I've learned in the few years that I've been blessed enough to be a part of the Young Earth creation community and movement. And I have to start watching myself now. I should start saying young age creationists. We recently decided with the new creation blog, we wanted to start using the term young age creationism. So I got to start getting that habit as well. So this is a presentation I've given. It's a little bit shortened because I don't really want to go on for 40 minutes or however the usual chapel seminar is. But this is basically me giving you 3 lessons that I've learned from being part of the creation movement. And so I think it's something that's good to talk about as we head into a new year and put in perspective where I'm at and where creationism is at to kind of set the stage for 2026, which will be a great year, I'm hoping, for Creation Reformation and the movement we're trying to start here in the New England area. So thanks for joining me and hope you enjoy this. But this was kind of an introductory slide that kind of was there for me to introduce myself. That's me when I was in college, my senior research project. So my second to last semester at school, for fall break, I got to go down to Louisiana. My school is in Tennessee. As you can see, I'm wearing a Tennessee Volunteers shirt, but still with the Celtics hat because I'm still a New Englander through and through. But I got to go down to Louisiana to go trap some alligators for a research project, and those were the guys who helped me with that research. So I was staying at this camper with my professor, and these were guys who are full-time kind of alligator biologists, I guess, who worked at that wildlife reservation and helped us catch some alligators. So kind of a way to introduce me and talk about my background in wildlife and zoology. But we're going to dive right into it. So 3 lessons that I've learned, or some lessons I've learned from 3 years now, really 4 as we hit 2026. Thinking back, it's my first conference that I went to where I can really point to and say, I guess I'm like kind of part of creationism, where I started to hear presentations from scientists who were at the cutting edge of science. That was really, really going on 4 or 5 years now. So I'm really thankful for kind of all of that. And let's just dive right into some of these lessons that I've learned. So as we head to 2026, this is a group of young people, or younger people. I know a lot of people at creation conferences tend to be on the older side, but that was 2 years ago now at Origins conference. I'm going to talk to some of my colleagues, and several of the people in that picture are also writers of the New Creation blog with me, and then a couple other people who I get to see every year at these creation conferences. And so there's a couple more pictures. These were from a year before this one. This was at the International Conference of Creationism, so ICC, which is the biggest event that creationists have, is literally where all creationists go to. And Answers in Genesis is there, ICR is there, CMI is there. Lots of scientists from Is Genesis History are there. And so that's one of them talking to us there at the table. That's Kurt Wise, or at least his back. And he talked to us at that table until like 2 in the morning. I think I had to rudely just get up and leave because he was just talk all about his research and his ideas and all sorts of things. But I was like, I need some sleep. I'm getting up early for more of this conference tomorrow, and I'm about to collapse. So I actually just got up and left, and I don't even remember how. I don't. There's no way of me to know how long he talked after that, but I know for me it was like at least 1 o'clock in the morning. So just some pictures of me going out doing, visiting these conferences and doing some creation stuff. But let's get right into it. What are some of the things that I've learned from going to these conferences? Now I've actually published some research. You can find an abstract of mine at the New Creation Studies journal, and I've given talks at a couple of these Origins conferences. So just what are some things that I've learned from creationists who have been in this thing a lot longer than I have, and some things that I can kind of outlined here again as we head into the new year, 2026. So lesson one, this was really something that I had to like legitimately learn, and it's kind of frustrating in a way that creationists have to kind of remind people this, which is that we don't know everything, and that's a good thing. And when I say that we don't know everything, most people will be like, well, yeah, of course we don't know everything. But like if you go to one of these conferences, you really realize that we really, really don't know everything. And sometimes it's hard not to say we don't know anything. There's really a lot that we don't know. And so scripture, the Bible where we base our theories and models off of, right? We stand out from the rest of the world in that we think that Genesis is a historical account and is a reliable account of how things went, but it's not a scientific textbook. It doesn't tell us how the flood worked and what actually happened to start the flood and all those things. It doesn't tell us how God created things. It says he spoke things into existence. He spoke animals into existence. But from that point till now, we don't get a lot of scientific explanation of how we go from how God created things to today, right? Explaining the world as it is today is still a very difficult thing to do for creationists, even though we have Genesis, which is something that the rest of the world, the rest of scientists, they don't have. They don't rely on that as their source. So whereas Genesis gives us some answers, it really does give us a lot more questions than answers. So going to these conferences, like really my first one, I had to kind of sit there and be like, I can't believe these conversations are happening. And like, we don't know so much. There's so much in here that we don't know. And you like Christians act like we do know all these things. We know there was a worldwide flood, and we know that, it rained for 40 days and nights, and we know, that the highest mountains were covered at the flood, then, and then we know how the animals survived on the ark and all this. But besides that, when we get to the nitty-gritty scientific issues, how do we get from an ark to today? How do we get from a world that is not covered in water to a world covered in water, and then the water receding? All the details of the flood. How do we get the geological layers? How do we get the fossils? How do we get, the atmosphere as it is today, the composition of the world's minerals, and all of these things in geology, paleontology, biology? We don't know so much, and there's so much to research. And compared to the world, which is building evolutionary models, we don't really have a lot of scientists working on it. So the picture I chose there is a picture I took of a panel discussion that was at one of these Origins conferences. And again, they're kind of blending in my head. You can kind of tell. I'm like, oh, this one was Origins from 2 years ago or 3 years ago, because I've been to the last few, and they're really starting to blend in. But this was 2 years ago, I believe now. So it just turned 2026. So 2025, and the year before that was 2024. I think this was 2023. This is a panel of scientists and theologians. So the two guys on the left are theologians, the three guys on the right are scientists, and they're discussing what the word kind means in the Hebrew. So yeah, that's the discussion. And so the theologians are trying to describe what the word kind could mean, and then the scientists are trying to fill in the gaps of saying, here's what here's what a kind could be scientifically, while the theologians are trying to kind of put the guardrails there. So this is how they function a lot, whether you agree with this or not. I've had some interesting discussions with people about whether or not this is the best way to do things. But basically, when you go to these conferences, a lot of what happens is basically the theologians put up guardrails, and they say there are things that are inbounds that scripture does not rule out and could happen. And then there are guardrails that you can't go outside of. If you go outside of that, then you're in you're in the territory that scripture says no, right? So there could be the Hebrew word kind, for example. could mean that God created different groups of interbreeding animals, and they can diversify and speciate and create a bunch of different types, but there's one kind that can't interbreed with a different kind, right? There are these general groups of animals. That could be what kind means in the scripture, but kind could mean something else in the scripture, right? It's not a scientific term. So that's kind of a discussion that's happening on the panel. Theologians are trying to put up the guardrails, and then the scientists try to work within those guardrails, and they look at the scientific evidence and try and get those answers. Now, a lot of scientists would critique this if they don't really, if they don't take Genesis seriously, or, they interpret Genesis differently. What they could say is, hey, scientists shouldn't have guardrails. Scientists should just look at the evidence and follow the evidence where it leads. And so a lot of this kind of banks on, is Genesis actually true? If Genesis is true, then the most efficient way to be a scientist is to take Genesis seriously, put up those guardrails, and then operate in what Scripture allows for you. That's one methodology. And if Genesis is true, then that methodology is going to work really well, or it should work really well, because it corresponds with reality. If Genesis is not true, those guardrails are useless. You should take down those guardrails and just let science kind of run free. But I tend to be a person who kind of likes having those boundaries to work within. And there are boundaries in mainstream science. There are ideas that they don't like, and they'll put up guardrails themselves, even if they say they don't. And if you watch my video on panspermia, that paper is pointing out that as much as scientists don't want to admit, they say, oh, we don't put up guardrails, right? They'll say, we don't limit what science can do. We just follow the evidence where it leads. Well, that paper of 33 scientists in the alien video, they say, hey, you do put up guardrails, basically. They don't say it this way because they're not following this line of argument, but essentially they're like, scientists do operate with limits. They put up barriers of things they don't like. Right now, zoologists really don't like the idea of Lamarckian evolution. They put up that guardrail and say, no, Lamarck is wrong. And they've done it throughout all of history. Now, maybe Lamarckianism is wrong, and those guardrails are a good thing because they mean that you don't wander off the beaten path and get to some crazy, weird ideas that don't correspond with reality at all. But there have been moments in history where scientists put up guardrails and say, no, this is not true, right? There's no way continents sit on top of plates that actually move around. That's a crazy idea. We're not even going to acknowledge it. And they put up a guardrail and say, nope, science must operate here. And as soon as you start coming up with these crazy ideas, now you're off the beaten path and we should disregard everything you say. Well, in that case, they actually end up finding out that, whoops, plate tectonics is definitely real. And then everybody switched and flipped. And now the guardrails that are up right now is if you wander outside of plate tectonics, now you're the crazy one. So even though it seems on its face a good criticism of creationists that we put up these guardrails and say, no, we can't wander outside of what Scripture says, that's not really that different from what scientists do all the time, whether they like it or not. They do put up guardrails and say this is where science must operate and science can't go outside there. Sometimes they're right and those guardrails are a good thing. Sometimes they're wrong and those guardrails have hindered scientific progress for long periods of time, decades, hundreds of years. They ruled out heliocentrism for a long time just based on ideology. They said, no, heliocentrism can't be true. It turned out to be true. So guardrails can be really good for science if those guardrails are right, if they're true, if they're correct, if they correspond to reality. So if Genesis corresponds to reality, those guardrails are really, really good. So all of that to say, we don't know everything. That's a good thing because it means we can keep researching and operating in science using the scientific method. But this methodology I talked about where theologians put up the guardrails and then creation scientists try and work in that in that territory, that could be a really good thing. And it's not, as much as people say it is, it's actually not that different from how other scientists operate. Their guardrails just aren't Genesis. Their guardrails aren't theology. They're different ideologies. We don't want to believe that life came from outer space. We don't want to believe in Lamarckian evolution. We don't want to believe in plate tectonics. We don't want to believe in heliocentrism. You can go back through history and find things where hundreds and hundreds of examples of scientists saying we shouldn't believe that. That's a crazy idea. And science must operate in this area. All right, I've rambled too long on that. Here are some other questions that we don't know. We don't actually know the mechanisms that control how species are produced rapidly. We have a very short period of time. This is what I try to remind creationists all the time. Lots of creationists are not biology focused. Oftentimes they are coming at this, they come to creationism from an engineering perspective. So they're engineers with an interest in life sciences. And so they come in and they refute evolution because they look at organisms as engineered things, which I find that perspective very helpful. But at the same time, people who come at it with an engineering perspective don't tend to acknowledge the problem that it takes a lot of evolutionary mechanisms to get from an ancestral group of animals living on the ark to all the different species we have today. So it's something that biologists like myself have to kind of remind creationists and say, hey, we need to find these mechanisms. We don't actually have that all figured out. And creationists like to say, oh, well, God pre-programmed lots of genetic information in there. He front-loaded all of this genetic information so that when organisms find new environments, they can rapidly speciate, adapt, and diversify. And that's a pretty good explanation on its face, but that comes with so many different questions. What role do mutations have? What role does genetic drift have? Populations move from place to place, and then allele frequencies change. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of factors at play in what makes a population a population. How do you get from a general created kind to many, many different species? That's a big question, and creationists haven't answered it yet. We have some ideas, and I've done some work in this myself, but those ideas haven't been demonstrated. How the classic problem in creationism, in at least creation cosmology, the classic problem of distant starlight. How do we see stars that are billions of light years away in a solar system that is not billions of years old? How does that light get here, and how can we see it? This problem has had some solutions. Again, creationists like to point to some broad ideological solutions that seem right, like front-loading genetics into organisms so they can diversify. Here they say, oh, well, God expanded the universe rapidly, so it looks like things traveled for billions and billions of years, but really they just have, excuse me, they just have the appearance of age, right? They look like they're really, really old, but they're really not. And then there's even some creationists who will point to things in the universe that look young. They'll point to how our comets, right? Comets have a lifespan. They have a very limited lifespan. And so all the comets in our solar system should have died out a long time ago, because if the solar system is millions or billions and billions of years, then all the comets would have decayed away and vanished by now. So why do we have comets? And so we point to evidence of a young Earth now, or a young universe. Now, as much as there is evidence of a young universe, now we have a problem as creationists. Because on the one hand, we can point to evidence that things look young in the universe, but on the other hand, we can say, well, the universe looks old, but it's just the appearance of age. God made the universe look mature, but it's actually not mature. Now we have a problem. The universe can't look old and look young at the same time. So our arguments for a mature universe contradict our arguments for a young universe, and our arguments for a young universe contradict our argument that the universe looks old. So we're not really sure, like creationists kind of have a weird love-hate relationship with the universe in a sense, because lots of things look old about the universe, but some things do look young about the universe. So we're not really sure whether we should point to the stuff that looks young and say, ooh, look, the universe looks kind of young in this instance. But then we also put together cosmological models that say that the universe can be a mature universe that God made, in the same way he made Adam and Eve with the appearance of age. He didn't create them as babies and wait for them to grow. He created the universe with the appearance of age as well. And so there are some problems with our arguments for those, because our own arguments contradict each other. Now, the Big Bang Theory has its share of problems too. So really all scientists kind of have this dichotomy with the universe of, we can explain a lot of things, but we still have a lot of questions. We don't know what created kinds are. I already put up that panel. We literally have a lot of questions about created kinds and what that actually means. It's not a scientific term. What is a kind? We are fossil evidence. We have so many questions about the fossil record in paleontology and why the fossils end up in the layers that they do. Why don't they cross over more? Why don't we find humans in layers with dinosaurs? Why don't we find humans in layers with really anything? Humans literally appear at the very, very, very top. you know, why is the fossil record the way it is? We have, again, some broad stroke ideas, we have some good models, but really there are so many more questions than answers when it comes to the fossil record. And evolution has its share of questions too. So questions is a good thing in science. It keeps us doing science. And so that's a good thing. And then, contrary to what skeptics or critics will tell you, we actually do get good results. We actually do get hits. We strike gold sometimes when we ask questions based on creationism, and that's what keeps us going. Really, that's what confirms to us that we're on the right track. That our guardrails, that our scripture actually points us in the right direction. And this is kind of one example. So one of our questions: how do so many variations appear in only 4,500 years since the flood? How do we get all the finch species? How do we get all the songbird species and all the lizard species and all of the fish species? And well, fish weren't on the ark, so they kind of have a little more advantage. But anyway, how do we get all these species in just 4,500 years? Well, just one example of how we actually strike gold in a sense is this is something that I've done with I pointed this out in some of the research that I've done, which is scientists have basically studied how populations rapidly diversify and rapidly evolve. And they've actually come up with four kind of causes or driving forces of rapid diversification or rapid speciation. And these four causes include one, geographic colonization. So geographic colonization in which a species, in this example, a bird species, finds a new land to colonize. And in this case, a bird moves from mainland Africa to the island of Madagascar. And once it finds a new land to colonize, it rapidly diversifies into multiple different species, or even in the case given here, multiple different genera. So a species will rapidly adapt to new conditions that it colonizes. So that is an example of a cause of rapid adaptive radiation. That's what it's called. Adaptive radiation is the diversification of a species into many different forms. A second cause is extinction events. So asteroid hits, wipes out the dinosaurs, or the non-avian dinosaurs rather, in the evolution model, wipes out all non-avian dinosaurs, and then the certain mammals that actually survived this cataclysmic event then are left with a planet that has been wiped out of all competition. And these mammals then spread across the world, and now you have the age of mammals. So the age of reptiles turning into the age of mammals. That is an extinction event that drove rapid diversification, adaptive radiation, right? Third, we have appearance of new resources. So in the case given here, you have a new mountain range forming as a result of plate tectonics, and this new mountain gives you different elevation levels, right? Different conditions at the top of the mountain from the bottom of the mountain. And so once this new resource appears, these plant species that have an ancestor, right? This one plant species starts to diversify as it colonizes this mountain and adapts to the varying conditions on the mountain, from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain. There's different conditions, different temperatures, different exposure to sunlight, different elevations, all of these different conditions. And so one plant species adapts and diversifies to fill the new niches that appear on this mountain. And that gives you many different species. And so that's another cause of adaptive radiation. And finally, fourth, you have key innovations, which is like a mutation gives an organism a new trait, a new function. And that new function allows that organism to utilize resources that it didn't utilize before. And that helps it diversify and rapidly speciate as well. So these are just four causes of rapid diversification. Now, if you're a creationist and you look at all four of these, and the fourth one is a little controversial among creationists as to whether key innovations can happen. I am doing more work on this. I firmly believe that key innovations can happen in the Earth creationist timeline. So I'm taking all four of these things and I'm saying they can all be incorporated into a creation model. All four work extremely well in a post-flood model. If a flood covered the world and reduced all animals into just their core created kinds, two of each kind, and then these two of each kind, which very likely did begin reproducing on the ark, because it says they got onto the ark according to their kinds, and then they left according to their families. So there probably were families getting off the ark of each kind already having reproduced some, and they have some young as they get off the ark. Now, as they get off the ark, all four of these mechanisms, or causes rather, go into effect. So as the animals spread across the globe, they are colonizing new lands. Many of them are going extinct, right? Lots of them go extinct between the ark and today. So there are many extinction events. There are many colonization events. There are many, many new resources now available to them. And there are probably lots of key innovations happening. Mutation rates are occurring, right? Mutations can change up the genome. Entire genes can be duplicated, and then these duplicated genes can eventually, after more mutations, give rise to completely new traits. I'm writing lots of material about this coming up. It'll either be on the New Creation blog or the Creation Reformation blog, but there are examples where we have observed new traits arising because of mutations and because of gene duplications. So all four of these are good causes that come into effect right after the flood. And so it's almost like a creationist predicted them, right? These people who came up with this, the paper is listed right there. You can go and find that paper yourself. These are not creationists who came up with these. They independently came up with four drivers of adaptive radiation, and all four of these things are present right after the flood to extreme degrees. So again, these questions that we have, right, not knowing everything in creation science is a good thing because it helps us do more research. And even though in this case, secular scientists did this for us, right? I wish this was a creationist doing this research, but it wasn't. But creationists have come up with good ideas and good research and good models because we have questions, right? It's almost like I almost want Answers in Genesis to change their name to Questions in Genesis because we have way more questions than we do answers, but that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And that's one of the fairest criticisms of creationists is that we often act like we have all the answers when in fact we have more questions probably than the evolutionist does. And that should be an advantage. That should drive us to do science even more, right? We should be following the scientific method even more because of all the questions that we have about the past. So again, I'm continuing to ramble here. I even forgot to change slides because this slide is driving my point home. We have mass extinction events, new features, new lands to colonize, appearance of new resources. All of those things happen during and right after the flood. So this is a big win for creationists. This is research being done by conventional scientists that fall right into line with what creationists are doing. So creationists put up the guardrails. We have the guardrails up. We have the territory in which we can now do science in, like based on the foundation of scripture, and we're actually coming up with models. We're actually coming up with answers, which is incredibly encouraging as a creationist. So that's one of the lessons to learn. Lesson number one, we don't know everything, and that's a good thing. Lesson number two, the theory of evolution is compelling, but the future of creation research is bright. So I'm going to have more videos about that this year, 2026. One thing that is even harder, it's even harder to convince creationists that evolution is a compelling theory than it is to convince evolutionists that creationism is a compelling theory, which is crazy, right? Because creationism is bonkers to the evolutionists. But I think this is true. It can be, probably not all the time, but there are really some evolutionists who are just so shut off to the idea of creationism. But honestly, the same is true both ways. There are lots of Christians who will just refuse to see that the theory of evolution is a very compelling theory that explains a lot of the evidence and really elaborately brings together multiple different scientific fields and provides a story that explains the history of each one. It explains the history of paleontology, why we have all these fossils. It explains geology. It explains current biology to an astronomically convincing degree. That doesn't mean it's not without its problems, but it's a very compelling theory. And I think creationists need to really accept that in order to move on to building better arguments to open up the evolutionist to our worldview. But there's a second part to the lesson. Lesson two is not just the theory of evolution is compelling, it's that the future of creation research is bright. So let me give an example of this. Tiktaalik is a missing link that was found by evolutionists. I talked about him on this channel before. He was discovered by a group of scientists who went out looking for Tiktaalik. And they hadn't named it yet, but they thought there's a missing link here. There is a transitional fossil between fish or sea creatures and tetrapods and land creatures. There's a missing link, and they could look based on the fossil record, based on geological layers. They predicted exactly where they would find this missing link. They said, we will find an organism that looks like a cross between a sea and a land creature. We will find it here. And they went to the Canadian Arctic, and they went digging, and they found a creature that seemed to confirm, not seems to, it confirmed this prediction. So right now you have the theory of evolution predicting something that literally came to fruition after they predicted it, which obviously is extremely compelling. And Tiktaalik then became kind of a new poster child for proof of evolution, right? Because evolution made this very specific prediction, and this very specific prediction came true. But that's not the whole story. So evolution is very compelling, but the future of creationism is bright, and it's bright because creationists then take a look at this evidence and they find that this may not have even proven evolution at all. So in 2004, Kurt Wise published a paper on extinct plants. He suggested that before the flood, there was this giant forest floating on the ocean. Now, I remember when I was sitting around the table and talking to Kurt Wise, and he was talking and talking and talking all the way up till 1 in the morning. He told us the story of how he came up with his idea of the floating forest, which is basically he found these tree roots of extinct plants that were very obviously designed to live in water, right? These root systems had these pores in these tree roots that plants today don't have. These were aquatic plants. And so basically he realized that there was most likely a large continent made entirely of plant matter. Okay, and it looked a lot like that, right? It would have looked something like that. A floating forest that sat on top of the ocean and just floated there, made up of plants that then got demolished and fossilized during the flood. Now, he proposed the floating forest to explain the order of plants in the fossil record, because evolution did a great job of explaining the order of the fossil record of plants. It said this plant, these plants should be first, and then these plants, and these plants. Evolution predicted the entire order of the fossil record for plants. But Kurt Wise kind of shifted the interpretation, and he said, what if instead of evolution, these plants are organized based on degree of how much it relies on being in an aquatic ecosystem? How aquatic is the species? And so he proposed that in a floating forest, when the flood comes, it's going to deposit and fossilize the outermost plants of the floating forest and work its way into the middle of the floating forest. And he basically ran this model and said the outside of the floating forest, those plants are getting fossilized first, and they are at the bottom of the fossil record. And then as you move up the fossil record, plants move more and more inland towards the middle of the floating forest. Now, the middle of the floating forest has like full-on trees that actually don't rely on, they don't have this root system. They're not aquatic plants. They rather survive by sitting on top of the floating forest. So you go from most aquatic to least aquatic. And he ran that prediction and found out that his model explained the order of the fossil record of plants extremely well. Then, focusing on plants, he then realized that basically if there was a creature that lived in this floating forest, right? So it could live in the water, but it would also live in these plant root systems of the floating forest. What kind of creature would live there? And he basically predicted that the creature would look like a creature that is kind of in transition between the ocean and the land. It would be partly adapted to swim, be a swimmer, but would also have limbs that could at least crawl along on these plant root systems. And so he predicted the existence of Tiktaalik as well. And when he looked at where you would expect to find Tiktaalik based on this floating forest model, he predicted that Tiktaalik would belong exactly where the scientists found it in the Canadian Arctic. Okay, and what's even more than that is after this Tiktaalik discovery, fossil footprints of tetrapods were found in Poland in rock layers that have been dated even older than Tiktaalik, which means that Tiktaalik cannot be the ancestor of all tetrapods. It can't be the missing link. It can't be the transitional form between sea creatures and land creatures because a land creature was found, or at least evidence of a land creature was found, lower, older, beneath Tiktaalik. So it's like the case of your grandchild being born before you are. It doesn't make any sense. So the ancestor cannot be found in younger rock layers than the descendant. But that's exactly what they found is footprints of a tetrapod found lower than Tiktaalik. So evolution predicted this order and they predicted this creature and they found the creature just as they predicted it. But then there was more evidence that came out that kind of seems to refute the evolutionary interpretation. But creationism has an interpretation as well that also explains the order that evolution predicted, but it also kind of aligns with evidence that we found elsewhere in the globe. Mainly, those footprints in Poland don't contradict the creationist interpretation because, in our view, Tiktaalik isn't an ancestor of all tetrapods. It's just a unique creature that God created to live in this floating forest. And now the floating forest is gone and destroyed during the flood. This creature has since gone extinct. Okay, so the theory of evolution is incredibly compelling, but that's not the whole story. And the future of creation research is bright. Lesson 3, we must not fear the evidence because it can only lead us to the truth. And so this is something that I've learned, again, talking with people like Kurt Wise, talking with creation scientists in the creation movement. This is something that they've told me over and over and over again, which is and this is the evidence that kind of Kurt Wise gave me and all of us really, as we were sitting at the table. That's Thomas Purify with us. He's the director of his Genesis history and does a lot of work with creation research and funding creation research. And I've been working with him in those areas. And then those other Christian Ryan is there and Peter Brummel is there as well. You'll recognize them from the New Creation blog. But anyway, we're sitting at the table and Kurt Wise basically gave us this very, very good advice that I'm kind of sharing with you now, which is that if there's any question that you have in creation science, anything that nags you, anything that you might be afraid to learn about, because you're afraid that it's going to demonstrate evolution to be true and creation to be false. He said, if you find something like that, go straight at that. Research that. Go right at that challenging piece of evidence or that challenging question that you have. Because if we're on the right track here, if creationism is true, if Genesis is true, if the Bible is true, then we can't be afraid of the truth. Okay? We can't be afraid of what the truth is. We can't be afraid of science. We need to go at that. We need to research it. And so that's why, for me, the biggest question for me is, again, I've read a lot of evolution. I've read a lot of the theory and how mechanisms work. And it really does seem to me that the diversification that we have on Earth today, the sheer number of species, the diversity that we see in the animal kingdom is so wide-ranging, it's so diverse that I struggle to see how that could all come from the ark. And that's a challenge that I'm sure people might even comment on this video. If there's any skeptics or critics of creationism, they'll comment, they'll say there's no way that can happen. That's impossible. And here are some reasons why. And some of those reasons are really compelling. One off the top of my head is that, we need diversification to happen really, really quickly. But elephants in that group, right? Elephants and presumably mammoths and, all that group of organisms, elephants and mammoths and mastodons, they have such long lifespans, and they also have very long period of time between when they give birth, and they don't have many kids. They basically have one kid at a time, and then that kid has to grow up, the calf has to grow up, and it takes decades for that calf to grow up, reach sexual maturity, mate, and have their own kids, and have their own calves. So, how does that work? How can you diversify quickly if your species as a whole takes so long to reproduce and reach sexual maturity? And if you include extinct species, there are quite a lot of species of mastodons, mammoths, elephants, and that whole group of animals. And if you want to include their other relatives, the hyrax, the okapi, like things like that, or sorry, the okapi is with giraffe. But if you want to include other organisms that are closely related to elephants. I don't really know what the baraminology says about that or what the created kind is for elephants, but the were there two elephants and two mammoths and two mastodons on the ark, or those all have the common ancestor? And if they all have the common ancestor, how does that work? So there are lots of these questions. That's why I dove into this. That's why I started to research how animals can diversify quickly and how to explain the biodiversity of today. So that's the third lesson. We must not fear the evidence because it can only lead us to the truth. And so that's kind of where I'll end this. We're heading to 2026. I'm going to have lots of videos about creationism. I'm going to have some videos about, this is going to be one of the themes this year. I'm going to have some videos about dialogue within creationism or discourse within creationism, good arguments creationists make, bad arguments creationists make, disagreements creationists have with each other. It's a little dicey territory to get into. I got to be careful with what I say or how I represent myself. And I don't want to represent other people's views in what I say. That's a lot of what we're going to get into, but just as we head into this year, I thought this was a good thing to go over is some of the lessons that I've learned so far in the creation movement. And it should be an encouraging one, right? We're heading into a new year and we should be encouraged by it. We should be excited about the future of creation science and the research that we're doing. We shouldn't be paranoid that we're going to discover evidence that's going to refute our theories and models. We shouldn't be intimidated by the theory of evolution or by ideas associated with theory of evolution. We shouldn't come across an idea that maybe an evolutionist proposed and just by that alone reject it and say this has no merit whatsoever because it's part of evolution. I think what we should do is look at every piece of evidence, look at every idea as something that has potential and has potential to explain something in the creation model. So again, all these questions that we have, questions are good. Things that we don't know the answers to are good. And as creation scientists, we want to go towards those things and try and answer those questions rather than denying evidence, closing our ears, right? Putting our fingers in our ears, saying la 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 la, and just denying that those things exist. Because the more we do that, the less we'll be taken seriously, and the less we do justice to God's creation, the less that we honor God's creation, the less that we obey the dominion mandate to rule over creation, right? How can we rule over creation the way God would want us to if we straight up run away or hide or close our ears off to any new idea we come across? God's creation and God's world is too big for that. It's too awesome for that. And so as we head to 2026, I hope this is encouraging to you. I hope you tune in to Creation Reformation, right? I don't like this part of building a YouTube channel where I have to be like, keep tuning in, right? Keep watching my videos, come in, like and subscribe. I don't really ask you to do that in every video, but as we move into the new year, I want to give it an encouraging message that we're going to be diving into that this year. We're going to be reacting to new ideas, new theories, new discoveries that happen in science from creationists and kind of bring attention to progress made in creation science and tackle some of these issues. And maybe some of these questions that I bring up in this video, maybe we'll get some new answers. Maybe we'll get some insights. Maybe we'll get some good ideas in 2026. And I have confidence that creation science is on the right track. And we have scientists doing really good research, come up with really good ideas. And so I'm excited for it. And I hope you are too. And again, I hate doing this, but like, I hope you come back to this channel. Hope you check out what we have in store for you in 2026. Go to the Creation Reformation New England.com website. There's going to be much more there. I'm going to update the blog. It's been kind of silent for the holidays, but the blog is going to be more active. If you're in the area, book a Creation Museum tour. I'd love to come out, meet you, go through one of the museums that we have here in the Northeast. But yeah, Creation Reformation is just one of the many creation groups that is trying to have a good 2026 productive, put out some good research out there. And so really I'm just rambling, trying to sound encouraging, trying to kind of build up creationism, get you excited for the year ahead in creation science. But thank you so much for joining me. I hope you kind of take these lessons to heart. Hope it gets you jazzed up, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with more synonyms for excited or whatever. Rambling at this point, thanks for joining me at the Creation Reformation YouTube channel. This was 3 lessons that I've learned from being in the creation science movement. Hope this encourages you to tune in more. And this is Jake Ramgren with the Creation Reformation YouTube channel. I will see you next time.